Friends, it's about time we start the program. So again, this is your host Sri Hari Atluri, and we have uh, attorney Shweta ji with us, and she will answer the questions that you might have on the immigration issues, whether it be H1B or green card or OPT. So whichever questions you have, you can call us at 323-410-0162, or you can chat with me directly at nrisamai.com and submit your questions. So just to talk about our host today, I mean, she was an immigrant herself, so she understands the problems that we are facing. Shweta ji came to US as a dependent on H4 visa, transferred to a student visa, that is F1, and interned under OPT program, worked on H1B visa, and finally self-employed while obtaining her permanent residency. So, lot of us go through this path and through different stages of this visa processing. So it's great that we have Shweta ji with us, so she can relate to what we are also going through. And she, having navigated her way through the complex web of U.S. immigration laws, and is sensitive to the challenges faced by her clients, and is in a great position to advise, suggest, answer any questions related to immigrations. So, without further ado, we will go ahead and introduce Shweta ji. Shweta, good morning, and thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure.
This is a very important topic, and for a lot of people, it's not only there's a lot of weight on the head, because when we are going through these immigration issues, because one wrong thing, you could leave the country and go back to India or wherever. So this is a very important topic for several Indians, actually. What would you say about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there isn't any dispute to that. You can't second guess on it, and it's critical to the quality of life that you have here, whether it's professional or even personal. I mean, just having the ability to pursue your professional goals and staying with your family. I don't see anything else which can be more critical to one's life anywhere. So definitely and it's very important to have the right advice right from the beginning, and it'll help you avoid pitfalls that can come in the future. So I love that's the reason I love what I do. I think I have the ability, rather the potential, to at least impact the lives of people in my community, and it feels great to be able to assist them through a process that I went through myself. And I was always an attorney. I was an attorney in India. I came here essentially to do my master's, and I had the opportunity to study immigration in school, and that gave me the idea that I should be able to, pursue this full time. I was actually a tax and a business attorney back home, but I chose to practice immigration for this reason. So I think it's just the fact that you are an immigrant is actually a compliment. I mean, it's just leaving your home country, you're building a life for yourself elsewhere. That by itself is a huge challenge, and the immigration process should not be a challenge. That should not be a headache for you. So it's important. I mean, I think this is a great, I would like to reach out to the audience and tell them that do not hesitate to take professional help. It's great to be able to be informed and to be able to kind of look up solutions online and stuff like that, but don't do that yourself. I've seen so many cases where people follow internet forums and, get information from contradictory sources, and they're all confused and trying to do it by themselves, and then they mess it up, and, we all know what consequences it can be. So it's really worthwhile retaining a good attorney and, follow what the attorney says and kind of try to restrict doing all of it by yourself. So yes, I mean, we are all here to help, and just feel free to reach out. And if you have any questions, this is just the right forum to get to. So absolutely.
Excellent, Shweta ji. So let's say, I think we have a caller. I would like to ask him, can you please state your name and where you are from, then ask the question?
Is this Ravindra?
Okay. Hi, Ravindra.
Hi, Ravindra. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Just I have a question on my green card.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, 2010, my labor got, 2010 I applied the labor, and in January 2010, it's approved.
Okay.
And recently, my I-140 got rejected. Because
Okay.
it is saying, like, in my labor, when they are filing the labor, they filed for 5 years of experience and bachelor's degree.
Okay.
And I have a master's degree from India, MCA, Master of Computer Applications, and bachelor degree in electronics.
Mm-hmm.
And one more point they mentioned is in labor, they filed alternative
combination of education and experience.
alternative combination, they say no.
Okay. Okay. Just a quick disclaimer here. It's actually going to be very difficult for me to give you advice without really reviewing the entire recruitment process that went behind your perm, what exactly was stated in the perm, because the perm is a very complex process, and also even the slightest error on a perm application can be fatal. So, and many times it may not even be the fault of the attorney or the person doing it, because the Department of Labor is coming up with new guidances and new stuff almost every 3 months. So it's kind of very challenging to be able to advise you like this on what exactly went wrong for your perm process, and why was your I-140 rejected. I would actually advise you, where exactly are you based?
I'm in Garden Grove.
Okay, so I would advise you, one, talk to your employer's attorney, and the employer's attorney may not even be, very helpful to you here, because he's the employer's attorney, right? So his or her, his loyalty is by the employer. So if you have a doubt, take an appointment with a good local attorney, take all your papers there, and he or she will be able to review it and exactly tell you what went wrong. I see this happening all the time. I myself, though I am working with several companies, but I do get people who want to come in for a consultation and kind of, discuss their situation with them. So it's just going to be a little difficult for anybody to be able to give you advice on a forum like this without reviewing the facts of your case.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I wish I could be more helpful, but as I said, I'll have to review the whole recruitment process, what exactly went in the advertisement, what went in the prevailing wage determination, what exactly is there on the perm form. So it's kind of a challenge.
Okay, in the denial, just they mentioned only if you have that my bachelor's degree not equal to US bachelor's degree, even though my master's is equal to US master's. But
so it's not only about, no, I'm sorry, in the interest of time, it's not only about what went into the perm. As I said, there are numerous ways in which that position can be crafted, and it's whether it depends on the equivalency that you've obtained. It depends on how they define the position. It depends on what were the requirements of the position. So it's kind of very, very challenging to be able to. It's not even right. I mean, it's not even ethical to be able to advise you like this on a forum like here. Okay? Yeah, you can actually send me, if you wish, you can, my email probably is going to be on the Facebook event page. If you wish, you can send me an email with your papers. I can review it then. But this is not going to be the suitable subject matter for this forum.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you can send me your papers. I can review it. Without looking at it, I won't be able to tell you.
Okay. And is that I have one more question. Like I am in 6th year of my H1.
Okay.
Okay. And like even if I got the extension on based on the current labor,
Mm-hmm.
is that I am able to change the company later if I want?
No, as far as porting to another company goes, there are two things here. I actually will take an opportunity to discuss this issue because many people really want to know at what stage can they change their jobs, right?
Yeah.
So basically, if you are changing your job while the green card is in process, if your green card has been filed under the employment-based first, second, or third categories, so I'm guessing you would either be EB2 or 3, right?
EB2.
And your so if your adjustment of status is pending for 180 days or more, that means you've already filed an adjustment, you can change your employer without affecting your green card application as long as the new job is similar to the current job, okay? So that's the only time when you can actually change your job without it affecting the process at all. There is another option that you have, and that is retaining your priority date, which means that again, if your I-140 petition has been filed under EB 1, 2, or 3 category, and subsequently a new petition is being filed under EB 2 or 3, you can retain your earlier priority date. So you can port the earlier priority date to a new petition. So the only exception to this is if your earlier petition had some fraud issue or was withdrawn because of fraud. So that's the only time when you cannot retain a priority date. So even though your employer withdraws the earlier I-140, it does not mean that you cannot retain the priority date. But in any case, even if you retain the priority date, your perm process has to be started again. So a new perm has to be filed by the employer.
Yeah. So if my I-140 got denied, still we can file a new labor with the new employer and we can retain the same priority date?
So if your I-140 has been denied, so you cannot retain your priority date. Your I-140 has to be approved.
Okay, thanks Ravindra for the question. Just as a reminder, so the disclaimer what Shwetaji has said, it applies to all the questions and all the answers. Just because these issues are so complex, it's hard to exactly tell what happens in each and every scenario. So this show is only to give a very high level and maybe answer some of the questions, not specific individual cases.
Right. And maybe I think this is a good opportunity. I would like to discuss some current issues which I think would benefit all the audience, and then we can take up the questions, So, we all know that the H-1B filing season is about to begin, the new quota for the year 2013. It's going to begin April 1st, 2012. So that's when USCIS, the U.S. government, will start accepting H-1B petitions. You can start working with effect from October 1st, 2012. So, the good news is that the economy is growing. There are more jobs. It seems it's always good when the economy is growing, but that also could imply that the quota could kind of fill up faster, sooner rather than later. So, it's unlikely that it's going to go into a lottery as it went like several years back, but last year, the quota closed about November, December towards the end. But this year, there is a chance that the quota might close sooner. So I would kind of encourage all people just to, have your paperwork ready, speak with your employers, just do it right for the first time. You don't want your petition rejected because it was filed erroneously. So that's a good heads up. It's already March 17th. And I know a lot of questions that I got were from people who were working in staffing companies, and there's always this concern about how H-1B petitions are going to be reviewed for staffing companies, and I have some good news to share with them. And just yesterday, March 12th, USCIS came up with a memo, a new memorandum regarding specifically mentioning staffing companies. And many of you guys would be familiar that there was a new Feld memo which was issued in January 2010, and that memo made it extremely difficult for staffing companies to get their H-1Bs approved. It had strict onerous conditions about how you had to establish employer-employee relationships between companies and their and the H-1B beneficiaries, and that created a lot of problems for people who were working at third-party sites. So this memo has actually been revised recently in March 12, just a couple of days earlier, and it's kind of a sort of reassurance to staffing companies that, all's not lost with them, and USCIS will review them objectively. So we are hoping that, because it's a high-level instruction, and hopefully that officers at the bottom rung of the ladder would all follow it. But the good news is that the government is not insisting on any particular kind of evidence. Like, earlier they were strict about stuff like client letters, that you have to have them accompanied by an H-1B petition. But now they have come up in writing saying that alternative evidence can be submitted. It's not fatal if you don't have a client letter. But yes, you have to submit evidence of an employer-employee relationship. And you have to submit that for the duration of the H-1B petition. So that's great news. I mean, I would encourage people, if they're going to the consulates for interviews, it's a good idea. You can even take a copy of that memo with you and kind of highlight the relevant parts, because even though these are guidelines issued, sometimes officers who are reviewing petitions are not familiar with them. And I encourage my clients to take a copy of the memo, and you never know how it helps. So that's one good development that's happened. Also, the government has kind of recently had announced sometime last year about an Entrepreneurs in Residence initiative. A lot of people seeking to kind of start their own companies and do their own thing while in the U.S., and the right visa is often the biggest bottleneck. So now government is planning to it's hoping to strengthen their policies and practices surrounding foreign or immigrant investors, entrepreneurs, and high-skilled workers. And they've announced this initiative, it's like a reassurance again to the entrepreneurial community that we will look at your petitions with a different eye. I mean, you cannot evaluate petitions for new companies with the same criterion as established ones. So it's basically because kind of to give a boost to the economy, you're encouraging people to start their own companies, generate employment, generate jobs. So positive efforts towards startup enterprises and job creation. You had a recent meeting here about on February 22nd in Silicon Valley, and I was fortunate to attend it, where you had high-level stakeholders from the government, investors, and other, esteemed members of the entrepreneurial community. And it was a very positive experience. So hopefully, if you don't have a visa but you want to start your own company, the H-1B may be an option for you. So it's not going to be easy, it's going to be challenging, but at least there is a possibility, there is hope till there is new legislation in place. You have your own companies can sponsor your own startup company may eventually end up sponsoring your green card for you. You have a national interest waiver that's available for entrepreneurs. So a lot of positive work in this side, and that's always good. Do encourage that consult a good attorney here who will be able to help you navigate this entire process smoothly. So that's a good point that I thought I can raise here. The third issue that I wanted to discuss, and I know a lot of people have things about their green cards for EB2s and EB3s. I mean, we all know that the EB2 priority dates are kind of getting current faster, so people are wanting to switch from the EB3 to the EB2 category. It's definitely a possibility, except only that you might have to find another employer who's willing to file your perm under the EB2 category, so that will allow you to utilize your current experience and for the purposes of EB2. or your current employer can sponsor you for EB2 for a different position. So if you're working, say, as a software engineer, your current employer can sponsor you for a project lead or a management, a kind of a position where 50%, at least 50% of your job duties would be different from your current EB3 petition. But another good thing to know is only yesterday the Department of State has announced on March 16th, which was again just yesterday, that they will likely retrogress the India and China EB2 priority dates to around August 2007, effective either May or June visa bulletin. So the current visa bulletin, which for EB2 is saying May 1st, 2010, it's very likely that this will get retrogressed to around August 2007. So this is something that's just been announced yesterday, and it's good to know. So though it was moving really fast, but it is definitely going to take a step back. So yeah, these were the issues which I thought is going to be relevant to the audience, and judging from the kind of questions that I had. And now we are kind of free to take over.
That's
questions people.
That's a very good summary of current issues and happening around the immigration and the updates that you gave. We have actually a lot of callers, and they have a lot of questions also posted online. So we'll take one at a time. But friends, I think I don't think we'll cover all the questions. So apologize in advance. We'll try to cover as many as we can.
Yeah, and I would also encourage people not to make it very fact specific and very complex. I would rather answer more than spend too much time on one particular question.
Right. I will start some of the questions from the chat that nrisamay.com they posted on there, or from facebook.com/nrisamay. So the first question is from Kumar from Woodland Hills in California. So he's asking, I'm currently on one blanket visa and my GC processing is about to start with probably EB3. I don't have MS degree. I worked 3 years before coming to US in a subsidiary branch in India. What options for EB2? Probable date to get GC with EB3. So his two questions are, can he apply for EB2, and second thing, if he applied in EB3, what is the probable date?
So one thing is, just as a general, again for all questions out there for all people, EB2 or EB3 does not necessarily depend only upon the candidate's qualifications. That's a very common misconception that people have, that, oh, I have a master's, so I can get EB2, or I have 10 years experience, I can get EB2. It really depends on how your employer is defining the position, the job position. Okay, so the job position must require a master's, or the position must require someone with a bachelor's and at least 5 years of experience. If the person is on L1, so obviously we know that L1 only allows you to be in the US for 5 years. So the sooner you start your process, the better. And again, whether it's EB2 or 3 would depend upon how the employer wishes to go about it and how they define the position. So your employer is actually in the best position to kind of comment whether he'll be eligible for 2 or 3.
Okay, excellent, Shwetaji. So the next question is from Prasad, Seattle. So he's saying, my spouse has H4 visa stamped and in India right now. Our company has applied for L1B regular, which is taking long time. Can she travel to US on H4 visa and live in US? Once her L1B is approved, can she do a change of status from H4 to L1 and work?
Yes, I did get his question. It was online. So yes, she can come to the US on the H4. Once her L1B is approved, she can file a change of status in the US. Or she can even travel to Canada or Mexico, any consulate abroad, and get her L1B stamped there.
Okay, excellent. So next question from Srikant Milpitas. He's asking, I already have my priority date set to December 6, 2010. I changed my company and porting process just started. I'm sure the perm and I-140 will take more than 10 months. What would happen if the date become current? Will I lose my priority date?
I think I did answer this question when I discussed about how can you retain the priority date and how does changing the job affects one's priority date. I pretty much covered this question, so we can kind of take the next one.
Okay, great. So Jeshwant from San Francisco is asking, I have a question on H1 extension with approved I-140 and PD current. Can it be extended for 1 year any number of times as long as form is applied 365 days before 6th H1 anniversary?
If your priority date is current, your H1B cannot extend it. So the extension that is available, so you basically, if your perm is pending or your I-140 is pending for 365 days or more, your H1 can be extended in 1 year increments. If your I-140 is pending, if your I-140 is approved, then your H1B can be extended in 3 years. But the condition is that there has to be, the visa number is not available, which essentially means that your priority date cannot be current. If your priority date is current, your H1B cannot be extended.
Okay, excellent. So we have Lingaswamy asking this question on nrisummit.com chat. So his question is, I have EB3 140, priority it is December 2008, with my previous employer and pending perm with current employer. Based on job description, I will be in EB2. Since my PD is meant for EB2 India, now once I get perm approval, can I apply 140 and 485 concurrent, or should I apply for 140 and then retain the PD and then apply for 485?
So kind of again, I did cover a part of this question again, and when I discussed I-140s and porting and retaining priority dates, I'm not sure what exactly this guy's question is by applying for 485, but you can only apply for your 485 if your priority date is current. So if it's, and currently the priority, if it's current, you can apply, otherwise you cannot. So depending on how his priority dates are.
Okay, I guess he's asking if it is current, then can he apply both for 140 and 485 at the same time, right?
Yes, if it's current, then he can apply for both together. And I would again encourage him to apply as soon as possible, because as I mentioned that the priority dates might retrogress. So if whoever priority dates are current, just go and apply ASAP.
Okay, excellent. So we have a question from Srikant from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So he is asking, I-140 EB2 is approved. Then can I go out of country and still be able to use my priority date, which is March 2011, using the consular processing? If yes, what is the process?
So again, I'm not very sure what his question is. He can travel as long as he has a valid visa in his passport. So the I-140 or priority dates or anything have nothing to do with his travel. And again, this is a good time to clarify one issue, that your green card and your H1 are actually two entirely different processes, okay? The H1 is a temporary visa. It's a non-immigrant visa. Your green card is an immigrant visa. It's a visa for permanent residence. And it's just more often than not, the company that is filing your H1 ends up sponsoring your green card, but it doesn't have to be that way. And in fact, you don't even have to be in the US for a company to be filing your green card. Your green card is for a future position. It's got nothing to do with your H1. So if you have a valid H1 visa, you can go ahead and travel.
Okay, excellent. Kind of a general question. I'm more curious about this. We hear when I was applying for H1 and I was getting extensions, it was kind of very easy. I mean, when you go to India, you get stamped, and that's how I got it without any queries. It used to be like almost like a formality, but nowadays a lot of rejections, lot of requests for evidence kind of things. Why would you think so, dear Shwetaji?
Yes, and it's true. Unfortunately, I mean, immigration is always a hot current. You know, it's always a very politically sensitive issue in this country. I think it's also, unfortunately, a few bad apples have given the entire process a bad name. I mean, we've had instances of companies using H1s fraudulently and, you know, getting into trouble with the law, and that kind of puts a cloud over the entire process. I think it's also the political view, which is not substantiated by facts, but when economy is down and when U.S. citizens are hurting, then, you know, the rage has to turn out somewhere else, and it's always the outsiders who get blamed, though there is no historical data in support of that. But I think they've just been getting more tougher and challenging on that front. So I guess all of it combined is not doing justice to the political climate. So hopefully, and now with the elections coming, I mean, nobody wants to make any, you know, no political party or leader is going to comment on any sensitive issues or changes in law here. But a reform is long due, and we are hopeful that something, you know, things will work out for better.
Okay, great. So we have a question on Facebook event page, facebook.com/NRSMI. So he's asking if I'm currently working on L1 visa, and I have I have a filed petition for H1 visa. Till what time I can officially work on L1?
You can work on L1 until your H petition is adjudicated, until the H petition has been decided upon. You can continue working on your L. If your H gets, it also, again, I'm not sure whether how his H1 petition has been filed, or if it's been filed as a change of status in the U.S., then he can continue working until they decide upon the H petition. And even if his H gets denied, actually, he'll still be on L1, so he can continue working on L. If it's approved, then he switches as soon as the petition is approved.
Okay, and if it is rejected, then he will have his L1.
He will have his H1 visa to continue on.
So if the question is, so if L1, he has already L1 and there is a petition for H1. If H1 is rejected, then he will have his L1.
He'll have his L1, yes.
Okay.
I'm assuming it's already been filed, because if the thing is, you either file the petition as a change of status in the U.S. or you file the petition as an overseas case, okay? So which means if it's filed as a change of status, it means that your status is going to change from L to H, okay, without you having to leave the country. But if your H is filed as an overseas case, which means that it will not take effect unless you have that LH stamped on your passport, okay? So it depends on how it's been filed. A good suggestion would be, once your petition is approved, you should check to see whether they have attached the I-94 to your approval notice. If your I-94 is already attached to the approval notice, it means that they have approved your case as a change of status, in which case your new status is effective the moment your case is approved. But if there is no I-94 attached, then what it means is that your H will not take effect unless the visa is not stamped in your passport, in which case you will have to leave the U.S., get it stamped at the consulate, and come back and resume working on H.
Okay. Since this is a sensitive kind of topics, I would like to remind our viewers one more time that don't take this as a legal advice, because it's very impromptu, and without much information, our attorney is giving as much help as she can, and there is no client relationship, attorney-client relationship built here. So just as a reminder, you can ask questions. So one of the question is, I think I know the answer. So he's asking if if the H1 petition is rejected, whether they get fees reimbursed, refunded. I don't think so. So
no, you can no refunds. The only time it will get refunded is if it does not it does not make it to the quota. So if you're filing your H1 for the new quota 2013 fiscal year and it doesn't make it, your petition reaches after the quota is closed, that's the only time they'll refund the money. Otherwise, not.
And one question. I'm on L1 and my wife is on L2, and if he transfers from L1 to H1, he's asking whether his wife status automatically becomes H4.
No. Again, no status becomes automatic unless you pay the government money to convert it. Okay, so ideally you should file your wife should file a change of status from L2 to H4 simultaneously with your petition, or if not, then you should do it as soon as your H1B is approved. Because if you are not on L, your wife cannot be on L2.
Okay, so it must be done as soon as H1 is approved. So that's
yes. Yeah, ideally I would say that just file it simultaneously, but if I think some people have a concern about, why do you waste that money if your age gets denied, but definitely as soon as your age is approved. They are a little lax when it comes to H's and L2s and H4s. The government does not look at it very critically because it's a dependent status, but I wouldn't advise anybody not to do it later. Do it ASAP, as soon as possible.
Okay. So we have a question from Jeswan. So he's asking, I have a question on H1 extension with approved I-140 on PD current. Can it be extended for 1 year any number of times as long as form is applied 365 days before the H1 anniversary? I think
I answered this question. If your priority date is current, your H1 cannot be extended.
Okay, excellent. So we have, let's see. We have a question from Florida. So he's asking, can I stay out of US and still apply for 485 from there when PD is current? So what would be the process?
No, 485 is essentially what they call adjustment of status. So it means that once your priority date is current and there is an immigrant visa available, you have two alternatives. If you are in the US, you adjust your status from your current non-immigrant status to that of an immigrant status. If you're outside the US, then you apply for a visa at the consulate. But you cannot apply for 485 if you're outside the US.
Okay. So other general question I would like to bring up because it has so much visibility when it happened. I think earlier last year. So this Tri-Valley issue, and then also a few other colleges had similar problems. So when students joined this college, I think the classes were not running as they should be, and these guys are working outside. So can you shed some light just to give some awareness of this kind of issues?
Yes, that's a good question actually, even though the Tri-Valley uproar has subsided. But I would again strongly advise all students, not to make attempts to, default the system or try to get your way around the system. Attend colleges. I know that in this case, Tri-Valley was certified, so it's they are bound to go by that admission of the government. But yes, do make an attempt to attend all college classes. Do not work without an authorization. Do not work in anything that's not related to the course of study. These things can permanently impact your ability to come back to the US. You could be barred for 3 or 10 years depending on how serious the offense is. So much as I say that the university was to blame, at some level I think even students who signed up for it knew what they were getting into. If the idea for you is just to kind of figure out a way to be in the US and get an employment authorization and work at a Motel 6 or work at somewhere else, you're not above the you're not without your share of the blame. So make an attempt, again, attend your courses, do the minimum coursework that is required, keep in status, and if for any reason you fall out of status, try to get your status reinstated, and do your due diligence with now. And actually after the Tri-Valley incident, even schools have kind of, pulled up their socks, and they are pretty regular about conducting classes. There are local universities here, and there are loads of students who do join the university because they have to figure out a way to be here. And that's fine. I mean, that's okay. That's perfect. H1, if H1 candidates are getting laid off and, they want to continue being here, you can enroll yourself in a university, but then do attend classes and kind of try to do what it takes to be in valid status.
Right. I also came as a student when I entered US, and it was really difficult, especially because, when we were coming from India, the perception is you go to US, you pay the first semester fees and you get an on-campus job which is approved. And when you don't get that, then there's so much competition, and you can't get more money from India, and you are applying for credit cards, and then the only option is to work off campus, and of your predecessors working like that, and you end up in such situations. So it's kind of really touchy thing, especially when things go wrong. It becomes really hard. So.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I understand. I mean, people, they make so much effort to come here and be in school, and it's expensive. But it's the environment and the political climate is such that, you don't want to lose the opportunity of being here. And there is so much that you can do otherwise with the professional environment here. And so don't jeopardize that for yourself for forever. So it's just that's the way it is. You have to do what is right.
And it's great that actually in India there is a lot of opportunities now. So it's not as disparate as it used to be about 15, 20 years.
Oh yes, absolutely. And I mean, even now earlier it was the lure of the dollar. The dollar had some a lot of but now the leverage of the dollar has gone away. So it's not as it was 20 years earlier.
So for our listeners, I want to. Of course, we'll continue for another 15-20 minutes, but I want to take some time to talk about our guest today. Shweta Khandelwal is a CA licensed attorney with a focus on providing customized, creative, and complete solutions to her clients. An immigrant herself, Shweta has navigated her way through the complex maze of America's immigration laws as a student, dependent worker, parolee, and entrepreneur. Because Shweta can empathize with her clients and is sensitive to their requirements. So, Shwetaji's office is in Santa Clara on Bowers Avenue, and her phone number is 408-423-8272, and the email address is shweta@khandelwal.com.
Yeah, so that L alphabet is common to Khandelwal and law. Yeah.
This contact information, unless it's already there, we'll also put it on the Facebook event page.
Yeah. Thank you. And I have a website, so my contact details are on the website as well. And all listeners, if you can't get through today, you can send me an email, and I'll try to respond to your questions.
So next question from Rajula Patel in California. So he's asking, we are American citizens, so I would like to apply OCI card, but I'm afraid if I'm in India, something like accident, then American government depart to India, so I can apply OCI card or not.
I don't see why. I mean, I don't know what her concern for not applying the OCI card is, but it does not. India does not give you dual citizenship in any case. But I don't think there is a particular concern. I would also advise you that if you have a chance, maybe you consult with an immigration attorney in India. Maybe someone who's more familiar with, because my focus and practice is on U.S. immigration laws, and if there is any particular concern, then that can be addressed better. But otherwise, there is really no concern as such. The dual citizenship option is not there, but you should be able to go and apply for it.
Okay. So we have another question. So he's asking, Jaswant is asking, I have two I-94s, one on I-797 until October 2012, which is on H1 transfer. One given at port of entry in Dulles, Virginia, until June 19, 2012, arrival to U.S. If I have to travel outside USA in July 2012, will that be an issue? So he has one that says October and one that says July.
I actually, first, I don't think you can, how does he have two I-94s? That's a concern to me. An I-94, you can only have one. There may be if he has got one and then he subsequently traveled and got the physical one on his passport, then the latest one would prevail. Okay, but sometimes there can be an error also. The port of entry officer might stamp it for a later or a lesser date than what the actual approval is. But I would say that he should go by the last in line, and also he should consult an attorney, because having two I-94s kind of does not make sense to me. So either he had an approval notice and subsequently he traveled and he's got the physical one, in which case the physical one would prevail. Okay. But again, I would again issue my disclaimer here and say, just have it checked once, because I don't know what the facts of this case are.
Right. I think you got it right. I think he's saying one of them is on I-797. So I think
right. Yeah. So the later one would prevail.
Okay. So another question we have from Nirav of California. He's saying, I came to US in September 2011 on a spousal visa. My wife is US citizen. I got my green card and SSN. When is the right time for me to file visa application for my parents who are in India? And how long does it take once I file visa application for them?
Yeah, so the first thing is that if you are a permanent resident and you want to get your parents here on a permanent visa, meaning on a green card, then you cannot do that. Only a U.S. citizen can, okay? So I think from what I understand his question, that he is a permanent resident, his wife is a U.S. citizen. So he will have to first file for naturalization, and I'm not sure if he has got his permanent residence because of his marriage to his wife. In that case, he's eligible to apply for naturalization in 3 years. So he should first apply for citizenship, get his citizenship, and only then can he sponsor his parents on a permanent visa. But his parents could otherwise come on a visitor visa. That's got nothing to do with his, status.
So do you think his wife can file for...
No, his wife cannot file for his parents. She can only file for her parents.
Okay.
I mean, file meaning file the green card, file permanent residence.
Right. So the next question is, I'm on H1 visa with, this is my 8th year. I got my H1 extension from my previous employer based on labor. Once I had my I-140 approved, I switched my company and got a 3-year H1 extension. Now I am a full-time employee of a small company. Any known issues with stamping?
Not really. I mean, just because it's a small company does not make it any easier or difficult. But yes, when you go for your interview, do be prepared with whatever is there in your petition. Be confident. Take the entire petition, copy. And if they have any questions, or if they issue you a 221G request, which is an administrative processing, then your employer must comply with all the documents. But merely because you are a small company does not make it any easier or difficult. Just the merits of your case.
I see. So we have Srikanth on the phone. Hi Srikanth, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, hi Shweta. Hi Shweta.
Hi, I'm here. Yeah.
Yes, it's really a great show going on today, and the clarity with which you're answering the questions, I liked it a lot, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are getting their answers. I have a question here, Shweta.
Yeah.
So my GC process, and for GC, birth certificate is mandatory, right?
Right.
So I got my original birth certificate, but there's no name given on that. I just have my parents' name on the birth certificate, because they said that even before 1 year, if we don't apply for the birth certificate, the next time when they do it, they would just give a birth certificate without my name on it, and that's the law or the rule that's going on there. So they're saying that if you attach an affidavit for birth certificate, that will be okay for green card processing. Can you throw some light on that, please?
Yes. So your basically birth certificate is what you call a primary evidence, okay? And the government has defines how the birth certificate should be. USCIS defines how your birth certificate should be. It should have your name, your parents' name, and all the details, and certified, translated, and all that good stuff. So if your birth certificate is not as per what USCIS requirements are, so you have the option of submitting what is called secondary evidence, okay? Affidavits are good secondary evidence. You can submit them. And I would recommend that you submit 2 affidavits from family members, like maybe your parents or uncles or aunts or anybody in your family who would remember the fact of your birth. So your younger sibling is not a good candidate to give you an affidavit. Okay, so have an affidavit prepared in the right format, and submit a birth certificate along with the affidavit. You can even submit school leaving certificates or hospital certificate, any additional secondary evidence that you have, and you should be good. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question. Thank you, Shweta.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I think we are coming to the end of our show. It's been 1 hour. So, Shweta ji, I would like to ask, is there any general message you want to give our listeners?
Yes, I mean, I think I pretty much started on that message. It's a personal thing to me. I would really appreciate if people go out and consult attorneys. There are a lot of good attorneys out there. And also be careful of the attorneys you are consulting. It's worth to spend a little more and get advice from a legitimate, solid source, as opposed to trying to, save on some whatever pennies and be in trouble later. So that's very personal to me. I would always encourage people to do that. And that's about it. Just for students and people, I mean, do the right thing. Attend coursework, maintain your status, and always be preemptive about it. Like, don't take it easy. I know people who come to me after they've messed up cases, or after they've, tried to do something on their own, or have tried to use a paralegal or an immigration specialist who call themselves. Even you have good paralegals out there. I'm not discounting their value. Just be sure of what you're getting into. And that's about it. I mean, it was a great opportunity being here, and thank you for the chance, and I hope that people found the information that I shared with them useful.
Shweta ji, sorry, there's 1 or 2 last minute questions.
Sure.
Let me see the name of the person. So Raghu is asking for the USCIS, is the main petitioner required to stay for a certain period of time with the sponsor employer after obtaining the green card? If yes, do you know any cases where immigrants' current future status was in jeopardy because they left?
Actually, there is no specific period that you're required to stay with your green card sponsor. Okay, the law does not say that you have to be employed with them for X number of months or years. The question is actually of intent. What exactly did the company or you intended? Because the reason that this company has filed an employment-based green card for you is because they want you to come and work for them. It's a future position. They say that they need you, and that's why they're filing this petition. So if you quit as soon as you get a green card, that intent is called in question, right? But that being said, I would say that when these laws were enacted, Congress did not envisage a situation where the waiting period for countries like India and China is like several years, okay? At that time, you would apply, get your green card, come and work. So now that it's taking so long for people to get their green cards, nobody will expect you to, nobody can predict what someone's intent would be after 15 years from the time that the perm was filed. So if there's a legitimate reason for someone to quit your job, you've stayed with your employer for a reasonable period of time, you're fine. It's all a question of intent. As long as you and your company both had a good faith, bona fide intention that you would continue at this job at the time when you first initiated the green card process, you should be fine.
Okay, I think last question. So this is from Mickey in Hyderabad. So he's asking, I have attended my H-1B transfer on 17th February of this year and was put on 221G administrative processing. The visa officer asked me if my sponsor is a staffing company or not, to which I said it's an IT consulting firm. Does this affect my chances?
So again, just because your employer is a staffing company does not by itself, affect your chances. Again, what matters is how well the company can demonstrate that it has worked for you for the duration of the H-1B period. They will have to establish that there is an employer-employee relationship between the company and the employee, and the company should be able to respond to the 221G notice. And I right at the beginning of the show, I talked about that the changes to the memorandum that have just taken place. So hopefully they won't look at staffing companies with such a doubtful eye.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if I think there is a caller on the line, so we'll give a last.
Hi. My name is Leela Kumar. Hello.
Yeah, hi.
My name is Leela Kumar. Actually, I work in the U.S. here from the past 5 years. And my current company filed the green card process under EB3, and I have the approved I-140. And I am planning to switch to the EB2. So my current employer is not willing to file on EB2. So I found a consultancy, and they are willing to file a labor and H-1B. And they said they are going to run the payroll also simultaneously when they started the labor, and they said you can continue with your work, and once it is the labor approved and the 140 approved, you can come over. So is that possible, simultaneously run the payroll on the two companies at the same time?
Look, if it pretty much doesn't sound it doesn't sound right to me, because it says that if you are working with company X on an H-1B and company Y is also running your payroll, you will definitely get into problems later at the time when you will end up filing for adjustment, or you will file your I-140, because as you are violating the terms of your H-1 status, right? Your H-1 is only to work for company X. It's not to work for any other company. So you do not have any other authorization to work with company Y. Okay?
So because
but
the company Y also filing the new H-1.
No, so if you're transferring your H from company X to company Y, you're fine. There's no problem, okay? But if you say you cannot have two payrolls running at the same time.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And is there any other way safely to transfer the priority, to port the priority date from one company to the another company?
Absolutely. I talked about porting the priority date. So you can port the priority date. That's not a problem. You can actually have company Y sponsor your green card while you continue to work with company X on H-1. You can transfer your H-1 from company X to company Y, but you cannot be working on an H-1 with company X and have company Y processing your payroll at the same time. That is not possible. You will get into Because tomorrow when they issue you W-2s and all, and you have to file for your green card, you'll get into a problem at that time.
Oh, okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Leela. I think that was pretty good, and I can't imagine how many questions we are getting in all directions, and Shwetaji, without taking a breath, she is able to answer a lot of them. So I hope our listeners find it useful, and if you would like more information from Shwetaji, you can contact her. Her offices are in Santa Clara at 3333 Bowers Avenue, Suite 130, or you can call her at 408-423-8272.
Yeah, there's one more number on my website. There are two numbers, so you can call me at any of the numbers. My email is also on my website. It's my name, shweta@khandelwal.law.com. It's there, my first name @Khandelwal.law, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Shwetaji. Thanks for coming and addressing a lot of questions.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Have a good day.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Folks, that was Shwetaji. That's an excellent show we had today. And tomorrow, please come back at the same time. We have an amazing person. His name is Ashwin Mahesh. So he's from Bangalore in India. He is termed as one of the 50 persons who will change the world. So that's a pretty big statement. It's by a UK magazine, and we hope you'll all join back tomorrow, and we'll have an excellent show. So come back again tomorrow. It's 9 a.m. Pacific time, and India time 9:30 p.m. Sunday. So that's India Standard Time. So please come back. Okay, thank you all. And when we wrap up, you can listen to this song.